They found 2,900 voices of dead Americans locked in a filing cabinet. What those voices said before they were silenced forever will destroy everything you think you know, and the government knew, they always knew, there is a filing cabinet inside. The Library of Congress right now, today, as you watch this. Inside that cabinet are thousands of handwritten testimonies from dead Americans. Not recordings, not videos, word-for-word transcriptions. Interview after interview conducted between 1936 and 1940 by government writers sent into homes across 24 states with one single instruction: get their stories before they are gone forever. That program was called the Federal Writers Project, a branch of Roosevelt's New Deal. They collected 2,900 life histories from Americans who were still breathing, still talking, still remembering a world that no longer existed. Then they boxed those interviews up, and for nearly 40 years almost, nobody read them. I found these documents chasing something else. I was tracing architectural records from the 1870s, trying to understand why so many American courthouses have proportions that don't match normal human beings. Doorways too tall, ceilings too high, staircases built for someone significantly larger. But the deeper I went, the more I realized the buildings were not the real story. The people were, because those 2,900 interviews captured something no history, textbook has ever captured, the first-hand memories of Americans alive before everything changed. And what they described does not match a single thing we have been taught in school. Not one thing. Here is the math. An American born in 1855 who lived to 85 would have died in 1940, alive and speaking to government writers when those interviewers knocked on their doors. They were children in the 1860s and 1870s, teenagers during the most dramatic transition in the entire history of this nation, not gradually, not over centuries, within a single human lifetime. Their grandchildren born in the 1920s who grew up hearing those stories are the last living generation carrying the oral history of what this country looked like before everything was erased. And those grandchildren are almost completely gone. Now, Mary Kelly was born in 1851 in Michigan. She lived to 113 and died in 1964, alive before the Civil War, survived long enough to watch television enter American homes. The Gerontology Research Group verified 16 supercentenarians born in the 1850s alone, an entire generation of witnesses whose memories stretched across two completely different Americas. The government had the opportunity to record all of them. It recorded 2,900. Then it stopped. The Federal Writers Project was defunded in 1939 and shut down before it could finish. Those interviews were not published in any accessible form until the 1970s. 30 years of silence around the last first-hand testimony of Americans who remembered what existed before. Before what exactly? That answer starts on October 8, 1871. Every American learns about the Great Chicago Fire, Mrs. O'Leary's cow, the wooden city. What almost nobody learns is what happened the exact same night, at the exact same hour across 3 separate states simultaneously. In Peshtigo, Wisconsin, a firestorm consumed the entire town in 1 hour. Between 2,000 and 2,500 people died, making it the deadliest wildfire in American recorded history. And you have probably never heard that name. Peshtigo. The fire burned 1.2 million acres in a single night. Survivors described winds powerful enough to lift adults off the ground, flames that moved faster than any human could run, heat so extreme that people crossing open fields burst into flame without ever being touched by visible fire. The parish priest who survived published his eyewitness account in 1874. He described something that does not match any normal wildfire behavior. The oxygen was consumed so rapidly that people with 0 burn marks were found dead, as if the air itself had been weaponized. The fire created its own weather system. A vortex of superheated wind behaving less like a forest fire and more like something detonating from a central point outward. That same night, Holland, Michigan burned. Manistee, Michigan burned. Across 2.5 million acres, fires erupted simultaneously across 3 states. The National Weather Service confirms this. The official explanation is drought and a cold front. Reasonable. Logical. except for one detail nagging researchers since 1883, the simultaneity. A hypothesis emerged that fragments of Biela's comet struck the atmosphere and ignited those fires from above. Investigated in 2004 by the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, witnesses in Chicago reported blue flames in basements, blue, consistent with chemical combustion, not wood fires. Never proven, never disproven. The fires were not the only erasure. In 1890, the United States conducted the most comprehensive census in its history. 62.9 million Americans documented in unprecedented detail. It was also the first and only census where the government broke from a century of protocol and did not require duplicate copies filed in local offices. Every census from 1790 through 1880 had local backups. The 1890 census existed in one location, a basement in Washington, D.C. On January 10, 1921, a fire broke out in that basement. 25% destroyed immediately, another 50% damaged. The investigation never found a cause. The surviving records were moved to a warehouse. For 12 full years, nothing happened. No restoration, no copying, nothing. Then, in December 1932, the chief clerk sent the Librarian of Congress a list of documents scheduled for destruction. The 1890 census was on that list. He was asked to identify anything worth saving. He identified nothing. Congress authorized destruction on February 21, 1933. The very next day, February 22, 1933, President Hoover laid the cornerstone for the National Archives building, the fireproof facility built specifically to prevent exactly this kind of loss. They destroyed the records one day before breaking ground on the building that would have saved them. Of 62.9 million names, approximately 6,160 survive today. Not by accident, by sequence, fire, neglect, bureaucratic process, authorized destruction, each step plausible alone, together something considerably harder to dismiss. Between 1854 and 1929, approximately 250,000 children were loaded onto trains in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, and transported to rural communities across the Midwest. At stops along the route, children were displayed in events contemporary accounts describe as auction-like. Farming families inspected them and selected the ones they wanted. Fewer than half were actual orphans. The rest were children of immigrants and the poor. Upon arrival, older children were required to completely sever contact with their past. Names were changed. Origins were not recorded. Many grew up unable to tell their own grandchildren where they came from because they genuinely did not know. 250,000 Americans whose identities were severed by institutional design. The timeline is not subtle. 1850s through 1870s Old World architecture stands everywhere. Oversized doorways, buildings scaled for someone other than us. October 8, 1871. Cities across 3 states destroyed in one night by simultaneous fires. 1890, the most comprehensive census in history captured during the exact transition, then stored without backup for the first time ever. 1893, the White City built in under 2 years using hand tools, then demolished after 6 months. 200 massive neoclassical buildings across 630 acres. Gone. Paris, 1889. Buffalo, 1901. St. Louis, 1904. San Francisco, 1915. Build magnificent structures of impossible scale. Display them briefly. Destroy them completely. Every single time. 1921 fire damages the census. 1933 Congress destroys what remains one day before building the archive that would have saved it. 1936 the WPA scrambles to interview the last witnesses. 1939 the project is defunded. By the 1950s, the last Americans who saw the old world are gone and their grandchildren choose silence because the alternative is too enormous to say out loud. There was a woman in every county in America in the early 1950s. Born in the late 1850s, living past 90, surrounded by grandchildren hearing her stories. Stories about buildings already ancient when she was young that the textbooks claimed were built just years before. Stories about the night the sky turned red across 3 states. Stories about trains full of children with no names and no pasts. And when she described what she saw with her own eyes, they nodded politely and changed the subject. Because her memories did not match the textbooks. And in 1950s America, the textbooks always won. The Library of Congress still holds those 2,900 documents right now, publicly available since the 1970s. Searchable, readable. Has anyone gone through every single one? Has anyone searched them for the details that don't fit? For the memories that contradict the official record? Because the last Americans who remembered are gone. Their grandchildren are almost gone. But the words are still in that archive. And archives do not forget. Not even when everyone agrees to. The truth is sitting in a filing cabinet waiting nearly 100 years. For someone willing to read what the last witnesses actually said, instead of what we have all been told they should have remembered.